John, you have your hand raised.
He was trying that.
We're back. There we go.
Just, I think David's just in the other.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
We're just waiting on David.
Ian, could you just message David?
I'm just getting in touch with him now as well.
Apologies, everyone. We'll just start in a minute. We just had a technical check a few minutes ago and everything was fine. No, we've lost one of our panel. Okay, I think it should get underway. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this Global Post-Merger Integration Partners webinar on value creation in logistics. So for those who don't really know GPMIP, we're a niche boutique consultancy that operates in the mergers and acquisitions and post-merger integration space. We are driven by an associate model and provide subject matter experts to help with integration, carve-outs and value creation within M&A transactions. So the purpose of this session though is not really to talk about us, it's to give something to you in terms of some insight and experience within logistics. I'm Chris Airey, I'm Associate Partner for Business Professional Services and Transport and Logistics sectors for GPMIP. and very happy to have today this great panel. And so I'd just like them to introduce themselves. So if I could start with John.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. So my name's John Lucy. I'm currently an independent consultant. My first year at this new venture. Background really goes back to a very, very young age, 21 years old, created and set up an international transport company, which ran reasonably successfully for 20 years. Since then, been involved with various large freight forwarding and transport companies at a reasonably good level. And I've been the head of international transport and customs for both the Road Haulers Association and Logistics UK. So I was very pretty well involved with the DFT and HMRC in terms of the chaos that Brexit will bring to our border crossings, and from an industry perspective, and some of it was listened to and some of it wasn't. And also one of my former careers, I was involved with, I was country manager for Morocco of all places, and I was I lived and worked during the time when Tangier Med, which is the biggest, newest free port in the world, was created, and seeing the development from a scrappy piece of coastline on the northern Morocco edge to being the number one port in Africa, number one port in the Med, biggest automotive centre of the world, etc. So I was always sold on the free port, free zone model, and that culminated in me delivering the Liverpool free port from its inception, which is basically from a PhD business case document, if you like, to the reality where it is delivered. So that's in a very brief summary. That's me to date. Thank you.
Thank you, John. David.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Shouesmith. I had a 28-year career in the military, which I left in 2009. And my last job was as the senior logistician in the UK Ministry of Defence. And since then, I've worked in the management consultancy business for a couple of big consultancies. And after a few years of that, decided I would be more satisfied working on my own. I'm currently director with a company called Universal Defence and Security Solutions, and I lead on their supply chain and a number of other bits and pieces that we do. And we work into, as you would expect from the title, into the defence sector, providing sort of strategic level advice. A couple of points, probably just to trail a couple of observations. Perhaps it's worth making from my own career, and it's one of sort of quite strong contrast between the military way of doing things and then the way of life outside. And I'm not advocating that one is better than another. I'm simply making some observations. So firstly, people and behaviour can be quite different between the military and outside. And I think that was probably the first, the fastest, the most important lesson I learned after I left the military is, in the military, you all behave in a certain way. There's a very strong code of behaviour. There's very clear leadership. It's not all about the hierarchy, but it's about everyone understanding their place and behaving accordingly. The law of the jungle exists outside, and there are some good people and there are some less good people. So working out who's good and who's less good is part of the challenge, and that plays into how do you understand where the value is if you're looking at M&A in the logistics business in particular. Who do you trust? How can you trust? What sort of structures are in place within a company to make sure that it's good non-toxic leadership that will deliver the value to whatever enterprise undertaken. And I think the second big thing, and it really is a contrast between the military and the non-military, is what you plan for logistically. So in the military, you plan for something to go wrong. So part of how you make things go right when they've gone wrong is having the right people in the right place. Whereas my experience of the commercial world is, inundated with data. It's yesterday's sales figures, or it's yesterday's manufacturing figures, or whatever. There's a drumbeat of data and production, which allows you to correct every now and then. And then once in a blue moon, something disastrous happens, which would really tilt people's operation in the wrong way. So I find it endlessly fascinating how you balance the resource you put into planning to fail, if you like, as opposed to just continuing to reinforce planning to succeed. And I certainly think there's something around the contingency planning dynamic in the military that's applicable to the commercial world, not in toto, but elements of. So that's me. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, David. Ian, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm the founder and managing director of ESOP, which is a new consultancy venture aiming to link up operational excellence with customer excellence via people. Prior to this, I had 30 years in global corporate life, covering transformation in supply chain and logistics. Also added in there HR, plus pre and post mergers and acquisition integration, covering all of the above, and property facilities and compliance. Backgrounds are largely in global manufacturing, food and beverage, high street retail, automotive, logistics industries, and I'm also a coach and a mentor for the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport and the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development.
Thank you, Ian. So hopefully you can all appreciate that we've got a really talented and experienced panel here today. So I'm going to now move into the questions, and I'm going to start off with effectively deal hypothesis. So we all know that in any major logistics project or in M&A, there's always somebody, probably an optimist, who has come up with a deal hypothesis, yeah, and then you have to get into the delivery of that deal, that transaction, that carve out, that acquisition, that merger, that market expansion, and that's when operators get involved. So there's always a tension between, we'll call it visionary leadership, perhaps optimistic, and the operators, who perhaps a little bit more pessimistic. So I'd be quite interested in how you all think that different personalities can be balanced to make things happen, or give us some examples about when they didn't happen so well. Thank you.
Can I go first?
Go on, John.
Okay, so I think it's a classic question really in this world. Is the visionary leaders are always looking outwards, upwards, the bigger picture for an organisation. And then it goes back to what David was alluding to before, that the style of that delivery into the organisation, because the middle management and the vast majority of the individuals within that organisation will be looking very inwards at their own particular circumstances and looking at the delivery of the vision from their own perspective. And that is when the vast majority of projects get snarled up quite quickly, really. And it goes back to sort of the basics of strategic management. You need to engage very, very early on. You need to understand the nature of the beast that you're dealing with. If you are working with, for example, if in David's former life, if someone with a very autocratic or bureaucratic sort of visionary style came into your average organisation without having any empathy, sympathy, understanding of what was actually going on within that organisation, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think we've all probably seen that so many times. And I think doing what we do, we need to be very tread very carefully in the early days. We need to understand the nature. We need to understand the feelings and the impact of a vision on an organisation before even starting to lay down rules of engagement in terms of, if you start saying we're going to do this because somebody said so, it never ever works really. So it's I think we've seen best and worst case examples of this in our careers today. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is fascinating. I mean, having been on the receiving end of 2 acquisitions and listening to the new boss, waving his hands around on a stage and promising how wonderful it's going to be, and then within months there's a hemorrhaging of the old people, and what they thought they were buying no longer exists. I think I can speak to what it's like to be on the receiving end. I mean, I think we have to face the reality that there's going to be inevitably some sort of cultural dissonance between those that seek to acquire a company because they've checked it out and see it's got growth potential, and therefore are aligned around a certain set of incentives, and those being acquired. And I think I go back to the point I made. This is if you're really serious about making this work over the longer term, then you have to demonstrate that. So I think you have to align some financial incentives with the workforce that you're taking over, and you have to be open and honest and frank with them. And generally, people respond to people being open and honest and clear. And usually, they can smell a cynic or someone who is in it for themselves, a mile off. But we accept that there has to be there will always be a certain cultural dissonance between what's being acquired and those seeking to acquire. But I think whoever's acquiring has got to put its best people. It's got to set out the facts as they see them. It's got to set out the vision for the business that isn't just platitudinous. There'll be no redundancies. We aim to grow within 2 years, or any of that, because I think people see straight through that. So honesty aligned with some sort of incentives for the workforce, I think is the mix, but it will come down to the quality and the belief that the individual that stood up in front of the workforce, how they can transmit that.
Yeah, I'll add to that in that it's, if you take a vision or a strategy, that's then how's that translated to all the way down to the cleaner. What does it mean? And this is where your kind of operational excellence stuff comes in that one thing that we tend to forget about when we do M&A, well, two things actually, in acquisitions, is the customer, and how does the customer going to be impacted on that. And if you've got vision, then that needs to be demonstrated to every point within the chain that touches the end user, internal and external customer. And that revolves around one of David's point there in terms of culture. Where I've seen it go not so well is a group think from the acquiring business that says, well, this is just the way it is around here and this is the way it's going to be. And if that's not communicated to the businesses being acquired, that's one thing. But you've also got to consider, what about the people who are in the business that are acquiring? Because my experience is they're just as nervous when it comes to the whole merger side of it. So you've got to take away a bit of arrogance to a degree, which is, as the acquiring business, then our group think will work. It depends on the culture and how that's transmitted all the way down to the shop floor.
Do you not feel that we should have more sympathy with the visionary leadership? It's very much harder to create value than it is to create reasons and to not change. David?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something along those lines, actually. Again, but there's always going to be some sort of cultural dissonance. No one likes change, particularly if you've been in the warehouse for 15 years. You're always going to be nervous and suspicious about that. But my experience is that if you've got people who are honest, open, transparent, credible, that's an essential precondition to taking people with you on the journey. And if you can line that up with some incentives, then I think that's fine. I'm going to sort of go back to your earlier point, Chris, about kind of deal hypothesis. And again, it's fascinating that you can come to the conclusion you want to do a deal because you've crawled all over the spreadsheets and you can see that there's some value there. But I always make the point that you can have as much data as you like, you can apply as much AI to the data as you like, but actually the long pole in the tent here is always about how the people work. And I think it's easy in a world where there is so much data, particularly in the logistics business, it's inundated with data. It's easy just to get seduced by that and miss the people thing. Now, that's not to say that the people thing should necessarily override what might be a really clear business proposition. It just means that you've got to be absolutely clear with your deal hypothesis. Is that value there that you think is there? And actually, what are the key things that underpin that value? And if it happens to be Dennis, who has been in the warehouse for the last 15 years, you're like, damn sure you look after Dennis.
So to build on that, GPMIP and many other professional advisors would suggest doing due diligence you know, and doing due diligence with rigor and being very clear on your target operating model. But it'd be interesting to hear from your experiences of M&A, or also just other projects, particularly David in the military. When you're given a project or an acquisition, yeah, how much due diligence normally gets done? When have you seen it go well, and when have you seen due diligence not go so well? And what would be the things that you would recommend people really consider before doing a project or an acquisition or a transaction?
Okay, I'll jump in there. I think it's the first thing is attitude towards risk. So if you want to know where something went wrong, there was an acquisition involved in where there are 800 locations in an automotive business, and due diligence was not done on property because it was too expensive, and we didn't think, that the global owner didn't think it was necessary until the point where you get a contamination issue. And when you get a contamination issue, apart from the cost and the fact that you can't operate out of that location, you've also got the adverse PR that goes with it. So the attitude of risk probably was a little bit too lax there, where at least some due diligence should have been done on the property. So the flip side of that is, if you do on your people side some robust HR due diligence, by doing that, then you get to understand more of the culture and more of the Dennis the Warehouse type scenarios of where to put your arms around people. So there's kind of two examples, but for me, it all revolves around your attitude towards risk in how much you spend on due diligence. For me, the more the better, particularly where things can stop operations and stop people working effectively. But I'm not the person all of the time who's financially in charge of the due diligence.
I think, sorry, if I can add to that, I think due diligence is a phrase, a marvelous phrase thrown out there. Your tendency is to look at the data that's there. If the data's not there, then perhaps you're not asking the right questions. You're not interrogating the fact that there are gaps in the data, and the people thing we've said many times is a key thing. But I think the other thing I'd say with regard to the logistics business is, it's a service industry. What are the drivers for success of that business? Do you really understand the supply side? Do you really understand the demand side? Or are you just looking at the spreadsheets from yesterday, last year, the last 10 years? Do you really understand what those risks are? And I think, Ian highlighting property just as one, unless you want to just fly by the seat of your pants, and there'll be some people that do, you really do need to allocate what's a relatively small amount of money to do proper due diligence on the people, due diligence on the management, and due diligence on the supply and the demand if it's a logistic business. Because if you don't understand those supply and demand drivers, you could have a supply side shock and your business is scuppered in no time. So you should always, I think, apply perhaps non-digital, non-data led due diligence effort to some of these softer issues, because otherwise you are really just taking risk, and that's not a sensible way to be in a business.
Thanks. I think very good points there from David and Ian. Just reflecting on my own personal experience, I would say that due diligence goes in both directions. I mean, I've experienced the best and the worst of mergers and takeovers in my career. Probably one of the worst ones was when part of a transport company within a massive big logistics group, very, very huge group, and with operations in just about every aspect on a global level. And it was decided that the transport and warehousing divisions would merge together, which in effect became a takeover of transport by the warehousing thing. And the way it was done was in a very autocratic style, shall we say, where the company being absorbed was basically on a divide and conquer. So it was individual interviews with all the staff, trying to get them to turn on each other. And it was assumed that because it was a good business as it was, with that staff and the management in place and the customers in place, that would remain so after the merger. The reality was 12 months later, the transport side of the business was virtually destroyed. there was probably 90% leaving of the management. Customers left in droves, and so on and so on. So it could have been done so much differently. So on the other side of it, I've seen that when the freight forwarding company was acquired, bought a rival freight forwarding company, which turned out so good. Its management was better, its customer base was better, its earnings were better, its margins were better, its structure was better, its culture was better, and the global parents recognised this quite early on, and actually done a reverse merger of the two companies. So the acquiring company then became merged into the company that they acquired, which was quite an unusual thing to witness, but it's been extremely successful, and it's created one of the major players now in the freight forwarding business. So I think the danger in terms of mergers and acquisitions is you leave it in the hands of the one or two or three people who are going to benefit individually from that merger, and you get not necessarily the best style of takeover, of absorption of the talent and the businesses that are available.
So, John, I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how due diligence worked, if that's the right phrase, when it came to the political projects you've been involved in, such as the North African Freeport and the work you do in the Middle East and Liverpool Freeport. So in those cases, and the reason for asking this question really is it comes to my earlier comment around visionaries, right? And people who have this deal hypothesis that may not be grounded in much operational reality, right? But sometimes you need the vision to create value. So be interested in how you found those situations where you were effectively given a, just go and do that big thing, and that was probably all the specification you got.
Yeah. When I started, it was quite simple because I was working on a blueprint that I'd seen in North Africa and the Middle East, where someone in a very in those cultures, once the leader, the king or whoever has decided that they're going to do something, it's going to be done, and everybody goes along with it. So I suppose in some ways it's easy to deliver these massive big infrastructure projects in those type of countries, as we're seeing now in Saudi Arabia. There's no procrastinating, shall we say, when these type of countries decide they're going to do something. That said, it's the way it's done. It's basically all the free ports and the free zones do. They create an opportunity for businesses of all sizes, from single entities up to global businesses, to operate with a competitive advantage that doesn't exist outside of that area. So in a nutshell, you are creating an opportunity of space or place, generally in an area where it's going to be very, very favourable for logistics. So my blueprint model was basically, in my mind, was what I'd experienced and seen and witnessed and worked in these other countries, where so we're going to create these opportunities for manufacturers, for logistics businesses, with certain tax benefits and customs benefits. So the whole point of the free ports of the model essentially is to create centres of a global trade. So, which is what in the UK model, the tax sites give tax breaks to build your factories, to build your smart facilities, if you like, in these port areas, which are generally 30, 40-year areas of brownfield land that's never been developed in that time, no prospects for them at all. In the areas that were picked out for the UK model were generally the largest dysfunctional areas within the port areas. So you're going to create trade within the port areas. The customs benefits then of the UK free port model then facilitates that trade. So we're creating trade, facilitating that trade with the customs movements. We're then going to be innovative in our thinking, in our delivery of the project. So my concept for this was always in terms of decarbonisation of that trade, in terms of providing facilities within the port area for shipping and for the road freight, and potentially for rail freight as well, out of these port areas. So as much as we're building trade, we're building freight movements, we're also be working towards the future of decarbonising those movements in the future. So that was a model that it was in my mind. The reality of that, when you start working with the private sector, and I kind of sympathise with David's comments before. So I'm coming in with a fairly clear vision given the project to deliver, but then you're into a myriad of other people who think they have the same amount of say, if you like, in terms of what the Freeport means to them, and it certainly doesn't mean any of the above. So if you have 100 people or 1,000 people, you then got 100 or 1,000 variations of what that means to these people, and then all of a sudden you get very, very bogged down in evolving strategies of other people and other organisations that has absolutely nothing to do with the original goal. And I think time will tell with the UK model where that ends up. There's only one privately Freeport in the UK model at the moment. So they are fast, they're bigger, they've got the connections with the Middle East. They had a very, very clear vision of what they was doing. It was delivered with good strategic management. And I think, without being critical of public-private sector infrastructure projects in the UK, I think time will be the judge on how well it's worked and the UK model. And I think also it's kind of a result of a hands-off delivery, if you like, or model from the government, where they kind of gave away power to these regions to say, okay, here's 25 million. This is what we think it should look like. You can do your own thing with it and report back, and we're going to monitor, we're going to evaluate it for sure. And that's kind of where it's being left then, really. And then things start going a little bit haywire, without saying too much. Thank you.
There is. Thank you.
I'll give you one example of where visionary leadership didn't necessarily deliver what was expected, and it's sort of related to logistics, certainly not related to M&A, and I'm treading on very delicate territory here, but I don't think there's anything that's not in the public domain, and I'm referring to the UK's deployment to Afghanistan, particularly Helmand Province, which is going back a few years now. And I'm sure you'll remember just the year before last, the evacuations from Kabul. Well, there was a great political vision that the UK would go and create all sorts of stability in this country called Afghanistan. And there was the hope that would be done without a shot being fired. Now, this is a classic case, in my view, of political hubris. But you could equally say there's corporate hubris, out there, similar sort of things. And unless you accompany that vision with the detailed work to work out, not just can it be delivered, but work out what could stop it from being delivered. So we're back to the due diligence thing again. And I don't think this needs to become a massive due diligence kind of industry and effort. There just needs to be enough due diligence to be able to say, yeah, that vision is a fantastic vision and it's deliverable. And in this particular case, it wasn't. Just picking up, I think on what John was saying about, these aren't the words he used, but I'll use these words: political stability. So we at UDSS have an interest in the development of a site at RAF Scampton, which has been the subject of some publicity, not least because the Home Office intervened after we made an agreement with the local authority to use it as a migrant place. So we've got a development plan in place, agreed with the local authority, a development corporation set up, there's a bit of technology, there's possibility of logistics hub going in there, blah, 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 all suddenly brought to a skidding halt because politics intervened and completely threw the thing off track. So part of the due diligence and risk management associated with these things is, what's the politics involved? And how do I manage the politics? Because politics is not about a single conversation with one influential politician, local or national. It's about a cadence of engagement at various levels over time so that people come with you on the journey. So the vision has to be, you've got to have a line of operation in there that deals with the politics of it. And that comes with the time delays, it comes with immense frustration, and it comes with with the potential cost associated with that. But if you don't, you will get upended. I think that, the longer the term of the project, the more likelihood is there's a change of government, change of local government, change of mayor or whatever, which will chuck a spanner into the works. So you have to resource that and not kind of bemoan the fact it exists, but accept the fact it exists and work out what your plan is to manage it.
Thank you. So one of the things that just to bring an end to this piece around due diligence and target operating models. I think quite often people look at due diligence in terms of looking for things that could go wrong and risk. Yeah, I also see another side to that coin, which is about confidence to act. You know, how much do you need to know? How much do you need to check before you're confident to go and invest to create the value you're looking to create? And very much, if you're not clear on the deal hypothesis, and you therefore can't work out what's important to the delivery of that value you're trying to create, how would you really know where to focus your due diligence and operating model design efforts to create that confidence to act? But just to finish off this section in terms of that piece is in your view, in your experience in projects, when did you know that you knew enough to act? Yeah, if you could give a couple of examples, that would be great. Or it might be quite easy for you, David. You know, you were in the Balkans. You know, what gave you the confidence to act? You were told, right? But there were then also another stage where you would then think about, do I have the confidence to enact the plan, the value creation plan, the delivery plan?
Well, I go back to an earlier point. Actually, what has given me confidence is knowing I have the right people to be able to deal with the issues as they arise. And in a sense, that's counterintuitive because there's a cost associated with that. Then there's a sort of command and control or a hierarchy that needs to put in place. But and again, on some of the stuff that I've been involved in, I need you to go and sort that problem out. I'm not quite sure what the problem is, but I have a lot of faith in you as an individual that you'll go there, you identify the problem, you've got good people skills, come back to me with what you need from me. So being able to fire people in to go and sort problems out, or better still, make sure you've got the right people in there at the right place at the right time to deal with the problems as they arise before they even become problems, has been a really effective way that certainly I've been able to get stuff done. And that's kind of counterintuitive in a way, because the whole idea of a merger and acquisition is to strip out some costs and to create some synergies. And what you don't want to do is layer a whole load of more people in there. But actually, if that's the cost of heading off problems as they arise, and if that's the way that you build trust and confidence in what's happening, then to me that's the obvious thing and the right thing to do. But there's got to be good people, people preferably that you know, but most importantly, people that you trust to be able to resolve these issues. That will be my single thing.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I think certainly, and you'll see if anyone's done any public-private sector initiatives, really, my opinion is that there's a gulf of between public and private sector delivery, shall we say? Because I'm kind of out of David. I'll be clear. I'm kind of out of David's sort of mindset. Then really, you have the right team around you. You can go in. You can do quite a lot of things. You can jump around a lot of hurdles and so on and so on. Until the organisation of the beast is that big and that's dug in terms of the politics, where it can play the politics game for years to come. To put little hurdles in, big hurdles, all the way through these projects, and I think we're seeing that in just about every government project that we're seeing. You can't imagine the scale and the scope of the cost increases on these projects. But it's all because no one's really looking at the detail of the beast. Everybody gets quite excited on this government project. There's going to be a lot of money earned and so on and so on, without you really realising that if you haven't got the political elements want to deliver that project, they'll just spend years and years and years making you run round in hoops and hoops and hoops. And I think that's what it is. So you go in with one mindset from a private sector to do something in the public sector, and the reality is the public sector ain't that good at delivering massive big infrastructure projects. They're good at many things, but when I can't really think of any good examples, but maybe that's me being a little bit cynical. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's what, picking up on your people point, one of the views of GPMIP is that we believe in the integrated nature of due diligence. Yeah. So operational due diligence, which is where we focus, is very much trying to look at those commercial, physical, technological, and people and culture aspects. Yeah. And the strengths in one of those dimensions can offset weaknesses in other areas. So, you know, if a commercial strategy needs to change, it's obviously easier if you've got strong people who are adaptable and flexible and can continue to learn. And that's one of the reasons that we very much advocate an integrated view to operational due diligence rather than a siloed view, because in separation, you can't really synthesize and get to that point of confidence to act and to know what your real key risks are rather than the ones you thought were the key issues before you started the due diligence. Okay, so just to move the conversation on, one of the things that's quite interesting in terms of logistics and transport is that it tends to involve a lot of assets, yeah? Whether it's vehicles or it's roads or it's infrastructure or it's port infrastructure or it's buildings or it's warehouses, you know? So, and along with that, you end up with the issues of place, that things are quite physically separated, and therefore naturally you end up with silos within an organization. I'd be interested to take your views on how that kind of KPI, physical separation and the geographical disbursement aspects of logistics make a difference to the ease of creating value or the ease of doing integration or M&A. Ian, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of an approach here that says ask the audience to a degree. So if you've got a number of warehouses, a number of logistics operations that are being merged together, it's all what does it look like? What's the best footprint, if you like, geographically, whether that be warehouses or retail centres, whatever. And that's relatively straightforward to do in terms of actually audience of where would you have a location if it was you, if it was your business. That sounds quite simple because someone will say, you know, well, I'll have it on my front doorstep, thank you very much. But from my experience of taking on several logistics companies and putting them into one, you can look at the fabric of the actual building itself and say, well, this isn't fit for purpose, so we need to move it. There's the opportunity. Where should we move it to? Where should we relocate it? Where should we consolidate it to? And how many do we actually need? So that's where your financial due diligence comes in. But if you look at something in terms of network planning, you've got two aspects to that. You've got the warehouse location and the stocking and the inventory side of it, which actually should drive then where the distribution arm sits, because people don't take enough. They don't really think as inventory as a key competency of the business, where it's the one thing that can completely cripple a logistics operation. You know, it's wrong product, wrong place, wrong time. I'm sure David's experienced this once or twice in the field. It's not quite as dramatic as that, but you know, I get criticised by friends and family for going to my local supermarket every week shopping, rather than getting a home delivery or whatever. And they say, why are you doing that? And say, see which part of the supply chain is broken this week. And I even got my wife now saying, what was broken last week? I said, feta cheese, that was broken. There's something wrong with the feta cheese supply chain. You know, so you can spot these signs pretty easily if you know what you're looking for. But from an infrastructure point of view, if you're purchasing another business, there's the opportunity to get best practice in terms of quickly, and it has to be quickly rather than let them think. And naturally, things like lease renewals, etc., come into place on properties. But you've got a real win there where you can quickly consolidate things by asking people, you know, where's the best place for our operation.
I would add to that, and it's like things change. Back in the 80s and 90s, the Golden Triangle around the Midlands and East Midlands was the place to be in terms of logistics and warehousing. And then the reality is, in this day and age, it's now going very much port centric in terms of logistics, because of the significant cost of moving a container from coastal port inland 150, 200 miles and back again, storing the goods in a massive big warehouse on a greenfield site for a number of weeks or months, and then send it back into the regions again. So the cost is drive and change in terms of the geographical footprints requirements of the logistics sector. And I suppose that has a danger of really not doing, is going back to your point about due diligence, is where's the market going? With logistics, we always think about trucks and planes and trains, but obviously drones are coming in now. So do we need these warehouses to be far closer to the population in terms of, you know, to the consumer deliveries in the Middle East? I'm going to go back to the model there, the e-commerce city in Dubai. It's created a facility for trade from single entities up to global companies. Anyone can order anything online. It's housed there within 2 hours. It's delivered by something that doesn't cause any pollution. The science fiction of logistics already exists in various parts of the world because of good planning, good strategies, and so on and so on. So I think it's naive to in terms of the due diligence, not to look where we're going in terms of the future. If we're setting up a massive big logistics facility where there's absolutely really poor internet, for example, possibilities to recharge with electric or hydrogen or whatever the green alternative fuels of the 2035 onwards requirements are. These are things that need taken into consideration now at this moment in time, because a 15-year plan is going to be a very fast-moving and fast-changing time in terms of the requirements of the sector and the demands on the sector.
I think I'll just add one more thing to that, which is, again, people and staff retention. In the logistics industry, the average attrition rate, staff turnover rate, is around about 35%. So that's annualized. Okay, so that's a lot of people leaving industry, leaving businesses to go to another business. It's not all about pay, it's about employee value proposition. But when you are looking at a network, you know, it's critical to say, well, what's the labour force like? And in addition to that, what's the labour laws like as well? So that can be a real crippler, where you sort of take your golden triangle, and if you start coming along the A14, there's more and more sheds being put on the A14. Why? Because, you know, part of the labour force is a lot more accessible.
I think, I mean, the only thing I would add to this is you know, what's the essence of the value proposition here? I mean, Ian talked about network planning. Well, in a number of software programs will help you with network planning. But it's always the inputs to those kind of programs. But you have to start somewhere. So as the digital planning kind of environment gets more and more sophisticated, there is more and more opportunity to model, you know, at a level of involvement and complexity beyond what we would describe as network planning, that hasn't been possible in the past. So I do see a role here for, you know, the great digital twinning of the operation and the value proposition, proposition. And you can scenario play, you can chuck in a bit more technology, and so on and so forth. So I would expect, you know, simulation to play a greater role in due diligence as the world moves on. And I can't but see that accelerating, frankly, as the models get better, the scenarios get more sophisticated. And actually, if you were really smart, you'd have a simulation running all the time in your operation, and you'll be plugging in scenarios, and you'll be pulling your people in for 2 hours a week or 2 hours a month or whatever. Say, what if, you know, and you press the button and you see the chaos that ensues, and you would then start to empower and train your workforce better deal with these things, as opposed to throwing your hand up and say, oh, something's happened. But also allows you to factor in the what ifs around the technology, what ifs around, you know, whether legislation change, the politics change, or whatever. So I do think that the kind of simulated environment opportunities are quite important as we move further into the 21st century.
Just on that, David, the slight contradiction that I'll make is that you can model things really well, and that's why I kind of ask the audience, because we actually had an opportunity to secure a site for a brand new head office and 500,000 square foot warehouse just off the A1, and we asked the audience, what do you think? Great location, right? Good value, etc. Yeah, and the comment that came back from the majority of the drivers was, have you actually seen what that road is like at 8:30 in the morning. So, you know, you have to take the modelling with your empowerment point of asking your audience and getting them involved.
I would completely agree with that. I mean, the modelling it gives you a view, but then actually, if you really want to make a difference with it, you then got to apply it with the people, and you can run the people through some scenarios. Say, what do you do here? Why can't you do that? What do you need? You know, those kind of things. So I do see the things, you know, as you suggest, as being interrelated.
Yeah, so one of the reasons for asking that question was that in many other industries, value creation is quite easy. It's usually a SaaS platform and some marketing, yeah, and product market fit. But in logistics, we can't yet but avoid the place aspect, yeah, or the physicalness in terms of delivery. And I think that makes, due diligence, operating models, and bringing the practical and financial aspects of property and assets into decision making when you take a deal hypothesis going forward. So just to move on, I know that at least two of you, John and Ian, I don't know about David, are working with startups, yeah? So in you just mentioned, I think, David, in terms of modeling and simulation, and I know from my work in the maritime industry, quite a lot has gone into technology and digital twins and data, but logistics, the amount of technology in place in the market is quite low, I'd say, compared to other sectors. It tends to be quite internal and operationally oriented. So tell me, John and Ian, about the startups you're working with and why you think they can create some value and why you decided to work with them.
Yeah, sure. It kind of goes back to where we started the conversation, really, that especially the sort of, I think my two main customers are going from startup to scale up stage now, really, and you need that affinity with the business owners. You need to understand that your style, or you can adapt your style to where they're going, and it's a shared vision, really, and that's why it kind of works for me. So one of mine, I'm obviously very interested in my future career, keeping out the UK as much as I possibly can because of various circumstances. I think the Middle East is so much potential for growth, as we're seeing all the way through. So a lot of business connections in the Middle East. So I'm setting up with a Polish transport company a regular overland service to Dubai and Saudi Arabia from Europe and the UK, which is something that was done back in the 80s, and now because of the Red Sea problems, there's a demand there again now. So to give you, if you're not involved with that world, what's going to be happening now, there's so much sort of chaos to maritime shipping at the moment, and the lead times are getting longer and longer. The cost is getting more expensive. There's a plethora of Far Eastern containers, maritime shipping, only going as far as Jebel Ali and Dubai, devanning the containers, and the containers are sat there waiting for vessels to bring them to Europe, or some of the cargo is being devanned and they're freighted into Europe, depending on the customary requirements and speed and so on and so on. So it's a pretty chaotic situation. So you can imagine there hasn't been a road offering. So we have a market. This is new. It's not been done before. The traditional routes now is maritime and air, price difference. So now we're offering something in the middle. And this has become really, really interesting to the market now. So we hope to be at the beginning of that curve then, really. And in terms of where we go in the future, the phase 2 of this will be doing an overland service into China, which can actually be done now. It's being done now on their trial basis, but by middle of next year, we hope to literally be able to do UK to Dubai and Dubai into China by road. So this is real pioneering stuff. So it interests me personally. It's a sector I've been involved with most of my career. And then the other company I'm working with is still in the transport sector. It's an AI driven, so it's a tech company providing the digital platforms for freight to be able to buy and sell freight on and so on and so on. So they pitched to me in my previous role. I thought it was absolutely brilliant idea. Of all the schemes of businesses I've seen in the sector, this is the one that's going to grow, and it has been. So my remit with them is really sort of bring in strategic partnerships in the UK market to take them as far as they possibly can within the UK, and then copy that model into new international markets. Thank you.
Ian?
I think one of the good examples I use is a small fulfillment business that I'm helping in a moment, and aspirations are, we want to be in a big sort of Prologis warehouse, 100,000 square foot. That's a great dream, but what are you good at right now? Who are your customer base right now? Once you drill down to sort of what good looks like in their business, there's passion, there's fantastic customer service, and when we were pitching for a business for a big retailer, and this is more overspill stock. We actually were proud to say, or this business was proud to say, we were 100% on time in full, 100%. I challenge any 3PL who could come up with 100%. And I looked at that data and scrutinised it, but it's right and it's simple. So the aspirations are great, but it's a case of let's do what we've got now right, and let's sweat everything we've got now. And once we prove the concept and the customer service element of it, and the people are right, etc., then we move on to the next stage. So very simple in terms of systems, relationships with suppliers and customers are key. One example where a major retailer has problems getting across into Ireland still, and yet these guys are doing it day in, day out. So we'll take that problem away from you. But it's not just the stuff for the stores. We need the equipment for the stores, the racking. We need the ladders, and so we'll do all that. We'll have a mini Ireland hub in Wellingborough. Okay, we can do that. So it's good. It's growth, but it's what have we got that's good right now, and how do we make that great?
Okay, thank you.
I'll just chuck in one example. So we're working with a software company with a background in the gaming industry, and we're trying to get them traction in the sort of defence sector. And interesting your comment, Chris, that you don't see a lot of simulation technology in logistics. Well, this company, I'm not going to say who they are. They've got some fantastic software, and it can take as many inputs as you might want to put in there, and they could be logistic inputs, they could be inputs from some kind of military activity or whatever, but it gives them the ability to synthesize all these things and model potential outcomes. It even gives you the ability to do, military terms, mission rehearsal, really complex set of inputs. And one of the challenges we've got with these guys is, they are hugely enthusiastic about this software. And if there are any software engineers on the call, I apologize in advance, but I don't really care too much about the software. What I do care is what's the output that it's going to deliver, and can you express that in a way that is meaningful to me? And I find that a particular challenge with these guys, because they're rightly enthusiastic and hugely proud of this thing that they've developed and sold, millions of licenses for in a different sector. But if you want to sell into another sector, you've got to talk the language, and you've got to start talking in terms of output rather than how proud you are of the fact that software can do this or that. And I think that's probably not unusual, particularly in SMEs or startups in the kind of software industry. Just one example.
Thank you, David. So I think just to wrap up, because we're nearly out of time now, I think just to summarise that from my point of view, that there is a lot of technology available for startups and scale-ups and data, particularly in logistics, where there's a lot of data. But I think it is around that value creation proposition. It's around how you're going to bring it to market and make it work, and how you're going to change your operations. And I think there's a lot of resistance in logistics because of the physical nature of it and the difficulty reconfiguring assets compared to other sectors. Just to wrap up in the 1 minute we've got left, John, there's a question in the chat about Teesside Freeport, if you've got any views on Teesside Freeport.
Yeah, I think the question was, should I have a look at it? And without knowing that what the business needs are, sort of thing, I would say absolutely. If you are a manufacturer, if you're a trader, if you're a logistics company, for sure there will be some benefits to your business to be involved with that, and so on and so on. So I would say absolutely, have a look and see what you can find out.
Okay, well, just remains for me to thank Ian, David and John for being our panel. I think that was a very interesting conversation about logistics and the complexity when it comes to value creation. And I think some old-fashioned values there in terms of know what you're going to do, know why you're going to do it, and then do it properly with people who know what they're doing. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, goodbye.